Paulos Mar Gregorios?
Well, the first time I came to know of him was through an article in, I think, the Indian Express. I checked it many years ago, but now it was so far back that I've forgotten. It was in 92, I think, 92. And the strange thing about the article was that he praised Nagarjuna, the Buddhist philosopher. Now, please excuse me, but it is it's a very remarkable thing for a Christian priest to praise somebody belonging to another religion. It's never happened the first time I saw it. So I was very impressed, and I wrote to him. But there was no response. That time I was in Shimla Institute of Advanced Study. He had already left. He left before I joined. So, no response. Then, I think in 95 or maybe end of 94, I was giving a seminar in Nehru Memorial. And the director of Nehru Memorial those days was Ravinder Kumar. Now, he didn't show up. He had some sudden meeting, and so he didn't show up. And there was one more person. She was there, and one more person was there. And so I said, what is the point in giving a seminar for just two people? So we waited for some time, then we decided to cancel it. And suddenly, Paulos Mar Gregorios comes from there in his black robes. Where is the seminar? So he said, right here. So then he sat down because he was very interested in the topic of time. It was on the question of time. This was a project being proposed to Nehru Memorial. So he sat down there, and within 5 minutes he was fast asleep. But he was very interested in it. And anyway, the seminar went on. One Ranjit Nair was there, and that's all. Three people were there. But he was there. I said, now we cannot postpone the seminar if he comes. And so he listened, but then he took a lot of interest in it. He had a great deal of interest in this question of time. So this was the beginning of my book, 11 Pictures of Time. Maybe I can just show it to you. This was the book, and I thanked him in this. And this was published long back, but it was just being prepared at that time. So 94, I had just finished my first book on time, which was published by Kluwer, but that was on science of time, and this was on the religious beliefs and so on. So he was very interested in that, and I discussed it with him many times. And so that was my first meeting with him, and I asked him why he had not responded, and he had an unbeatable argument. He said, I had a stroke. So he had a stroke, so nothing to be done about it. And so that is how, and then of course we started, I used to go quite regularly to your church at near Batra Hospital, and we used to have long discussions and so on. So that was the thing. Yeah?
So as you rightly said that you were involved and actively a part of the Indian Institute of Advanced Study in Shimla. You had your research, everything there.
Indian Institute of Advanced Study just has fellowships. So they are short-term fellowships for about 2 years. So I was a fellow there, she was a fellow there, and he was also a fellow there. But he was a fellow there before I joined, because he was there in the late 80s. I joined in 91.
So you have any memories of what he was doing there?
I know something about what he was doing. But about Enlightenment East and West. So he had given me a copy of that. It is lying somewhere here. And that is what he was working on. And that book came out from Shimla Institute. Yeah.
So as you rightly said, he was a Christian bishop, and he used to widen his mind and was very open to other ideologies and religion.
Yeah.
So what, according to you, is an ideal religious leader?
Well, I don't think about who an ideal religious leader should be, right? But if you are asking about him, there were several issues which we discussed, which we had in common, which he took up, which other people, especially other religious people, would find it difficult to take up. For example, in this book, the question that was taken up was about Augustine. Augustine and his theology, and how that is reflected in the work of Stephen Hawking,
Okay.
right? How it is, so it's Augustine Hawking argument, as I call it. So the question is, Augustine is called a saint by mainstream Christianity. But he did not do that, his thinking was quite different. So he said, oh, Augustine was not a theologian, and he said that I was going to do a PhD on it in Oxford. But then he was dissuaded. And there are many important issues, you see, because what Augustine did was that pre-Nicene Christianity was quite different from post-Nicene Christianity. And Augustine is a major architect of post-Nicene Christianity. So he made God transcendent. The earlier Christianity of Origen, God was immanent. And that immanence is very much reflected, for example, when you say it is God within man, and therefore equity. Because if God is in you and in me, then we are the same, and therefore there is no need to make a distinction. So Aham Brahmasmi, or in the Sufi tradition, if you have Anal Haq. So these were the issues, but then Augustine replaced it. He made God transcendent. So transcendent means he is going to give out punishment and give out rewards in heaven and hell. And that, because at that time the church combined with the Roman state. So that state-church relationship means once you use religion, I have mentioned in this book, to come to power, then the religion gets distorted. And whatever the religion may be, it doesn't matter. As I have said, it could be Christianity, it could be Hinduism, it could be Islam, it doesn't matter. The moment you use it for power, then it's the needs of power which prevail, and that distorts the religion. And that is what happened. So, you see, transcendent God means it makes priests very powerful, because they are agents of a powerful God. And that was accepted by the church, which then cursed Origen. But he did not touch upon Origen. What he did was he wanted to have immanence, and he wanted to have equity. And because of that, he went to his namesake, Gregory of Nyssa. That is what he did. Because Gregory of Nyssa, if you say loosely speaking, Christian mysticism, early Christian mysticism, which was connected with Plotinus, with Neoplatonism, and so on, and which, according to me, is of Egyptian origin. It originates in the Egyptian mysteries rather than in the Greeks. But that's a different issue. Point is, there's immanence, and he pursued that immanence and equity. And there are many more reasons for it, because if you look at, he was with Haile Selassie as a special advisor. Now, Haile Selassie was, the Rastafarans. So his what was there was that these blacks in Jamaica who had revolted and who had picked up, they saw him because he was a black emperor during colonial times in Africa, and therefore he was worshipped. He was regarded as a reincarnation of Jesus. Whether he agreed, he disagreed with it and said, don't regard me like that, but he was regarded like that. If you see, there's a video when he goes to Jamaica, there's a whole crowd all the way from the airport till here, and he is bewildered, why are there so many people turning out? So that became, but then they regarded mainstream Christianity as an oppressor. And so there was this issue, and equity was very important, because in fact, if you see, it was the church which created racism, which created slavery. The Pope gave those firmans, and that is how this sort of thing happened. And so he was against all this, and he was trying to express it as diplomatically as possible. See, I can say whatever I like, right? He was in a position of power, so he has to be very careful about what he says. So that was the situation, yeah.
So can you share the association of Dr. Paulus Mar Gregorios with the Pope?
Yeah, he told me that story. You see, he, as I told you, he wrote this article about Nagarjun.
Yes.
And he told me the story that he went to meet the Pope.
Okay.
And he told the Pope that, you see, Christianity has to be more sympathetic to local traditions. It has to at least have knowledge of the local traditions and not dismiss them. So he gave an example that just as in the Western tradition, everybody is supposed to know Plato. If you don't know Plato, then you are illiterate according to the Western tradition. So he said, likewise, people should know Nagarjun in India, and you are talking about it. So he said the Pope showed him the door immediately. So, I mean, there is always this problem, there has been a problem, as you must of course be aware, the oldest Bibles in the world are Aramaic Bibles. And when they are so different from the Vulgate and the King James Version that when the Portuguese came, they were very uncomfortable with it. And they tricked the Syrian Christian bishops in that synod of Deamper, as they call it, Udayam Perur. And they burnt all the Bibles except for one which survives in the Bodleian Library. So, but, this is, yeah.
Also, Mar Gregorios' association with George Sudarshan?
Oh yeah, I asked him about it, and because Sudarshan was a good friend of mine. And maybe there should be some background as to who Sudarshan was, because his interaction with me, I pointed out that Einstein stole the work of Poincaré. Now Sudarshan said he was twice deprived of a Nobel Prize. That was his biggest grievance in life, naturally. Because of various reasons, somebody picked up the work. So he used to be very happy because Poincaré was a very famous man, and his cousin was the Prime Minister of France for many years and also the President. So he said, if people can steal from Poincaré, who am I? Just a small person. And so this is what he was saying. Now when I asked Paulus Mar Gregorios about it, his reaction was a little bit strange, because he said that Sudarshan got associated, as you know, with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi.
Okay.
And so he said he married a high caste Iyengar girl. I met her, and then he changed because Syrian Christianity was lower caste, and so he married this high caste and he changed to Advait Vedanta. Okay. But let me also tell you what is Sudarshan's point of view. I had another Syrian Christian student who was heckling Sudarshan sometime that what is this Advait Vedanta is casteist. What are you talking about equity? So he said, what are you saying? Because if you look at Sri Narayan Guru, and of course you must be knowing Sri Narayan Guru. So Sri Narayan Guru was an Advait Vedantist, he was from the lower caste. Now how can you have, if you have casteism, how do you have a religious teacher who is from the lower caste? And so many of them are there in India. Okay. Sri Narayan Guru was one of the examples that he said. So it's not Advait Vedanta per se. There are other issues. Colonialism created oppressiveness of caste and so on. So that's the issue, but that was his reaction. Yeah. And that was Sudarshan's reaction, so I have given you both sides of it. Yes. Right?
So, how are we to view the world, especially in the context of India? And Mar Gregorios was a champion of communal harmony and bringing and respecting all other ideologies. So, how should we cultivate an idea of a harmonious India?
Yeah, he was all in favor of dialogue. Yes. And I think that dialogue has been missing. Because if you see the mainstream church propaganda is always we are superior, you are inferior, finish them up. And if you see what happened, all the people in Americas were killed, all the people in Australia were killed, and they were killed because the Pope said that's your moral duty to do so. If you go to, say, Incas in Peru, so you see Inca temple, on top of that they built a church. If you go to Peru, you have a pyramid, on top of that they built a church. Now these are all very shabby demonstrations of showing that we are superior and you are inferior. And this is still happening, very much still happening in terms of, let us say, the mathematics syllabus with which I am concerned. The Greeks did some superior kind of mathematics. It's not the Greeks, it's the Crusading Church which did it. Anyway, that's a separate issue. The point is that that dialogue has to be there, and the dialogue is missing. So it is not necessary that you have to respect everything. If somebody burns your Bibles, you cannot necessarily respect him or accept that. Right? That is not acceptable at all. But dialogue should take place. Dialogue and open dialogue should take place. For example, the way we are talking, it should take place so that people get an understanding of various points of view, and therefore they are more open, more receptive. And also, I mean, as you said, if you go towards that kind of spirituality or the mysticism which is already there in Christianity, which was a very strong part of early Christianity. You see, I gave a talk recently to Google, and I pointed out that people say Abrahamic religions and dharmic religions. That's not correct, because if you see what Origen said, it is indistinguishable almost from Hinduism. So he has karma sanskar, he has all that, and I have a thing from Origen's De Principis. It's also mentioned here, because the curse on cyclic time was pronounced against him. So these are all issues which could be sorted out if we can have an open dialogue. But that open dialogue is missing, because the idea is to control information as much as possible, not allow things to come out, and that becomes a problem, because then suspicions build up.
So adding to what you said, dialogue.
Yeah.
So Mar Gregorios was also involved in dialogue between science and religion.
Yes, very much so, and that is another reason why we were so interested. In fact, this talk that I talked about in Google, or in this book, for example, see, the title is Physics, Philosophy and Politics of Time Beliefs, right? So there is the physics of it also. Very much so, because ultimately, how are you going to decide? Instead of saying, look, I say that time is like that, Augustine will say, okay, there is a creation, there is apocalypse, and after that, whatever happens. But if you look at it from the best means of knowledge that we have of science, then you get a completely different picture. So that is very important, and it is not necessarily a relationship of confrontation. If you're talking about two systems which are claiming to have complete knowledge of the world, you must bring science into account. So I am actually a scientist, right? My first book on time was on science, the physics of time. And then when I realized there are so many other dimensions to time which I don't know, there are theological dimensions and so on, then I wrote this book, right? So yes, in fact, you also get into ethics from there. So for example, my harmony principle, which I have written, which says, okay, you must act so as to increase harmony in the cosmos. So I fully agree with that. And that is based, because why should anybody believe it? That's the question. In fact, that was the first talk I gave in the Shimla Institute. So it has to have a solid scientific basis, then only people will believe. Otherwise, your ethics just becomes, okay, it's a commandment, and you listen or don't listen, and anything can happen. Yeah.
So what are the three qualities of Bishop Dr. Paulos Mar Gregorios that can help or inspire the young generation or the coming generation?
Well, first of all, he was a strong believer in equity.
Okay.
And I think that is very important for everybody, not just for the young generation, for the older generation also, because how do you perceive Christianity? That itself, equity, because it was there in early Christianity. What happened to it? Right? So you have to think about it, that some politics took over, some change took place, which is not acceptable. He was outspoken. And he was able to speak, at least he was there. I mean, maybe he was diplomatic about Augustine and so on, but he was, by and large, he was outspoken, and the very fact that he could speak about against Augustine, that he could talk about Gregory of Nyssa, although people did not pay too much attention to that, that I think is an important quality. Okay. That is one thing. The second thing was his concern for equity, right? Which, of course, because he was with Haile Selassie, the blacks, for them, it's a very important dimension. And equity, as I said, is implicit in immanence. The moment he takes that, that becomes structurally part of the doctrine that is being proposed. Okay. The third thing is that, dialogue. That's the third part, that he was always willing for dialogue. I mean, let us not say it should take place in an attitude of friendliness. You may disagree, but let us not grab each other's throats. All right, you can disagree as much as you like, but let us, because that has been also the tradition in India. Because the Buddhists and Jains, for example, how they argued viciously against each other, but they never killed each other. That did not happen, right? Because that is an admission that your arguments are not strong enough. After Paulus Mar Gregorios died, I visited. When he died, I was there. And I visited once after that. It was so, this thing, because they wanted to carry his body in a flat position, and they could not, in sitting position. So they could not get a helicopter, and they phoned up P.C. Alexander. He was my mother's classmate. So P.C. Alexander, he was also Syrian Christian, so they phoned him. But he could not do anything and so on. And then, I found, frankly, that the intellectual atmosphere that she had created did not exist anymore. Because it was just next to the ICPR also. Yeah, so I did not find that there is that... you are showing some interest in that, but there was very... So that was missing. And so he was a great person, and what he did has to be appreciated, and it is very highly regarded, everywhere. Let me say that once I was giving a talk in front of Murli Manohar Joshi. This was in Ujjain when Murli Manohar Joshi was the education minister. And I was giving this talk, and I took the name of Paulus Mar Gregorios. This was sometime 2004 something. And he agreed with that fully. He was nodding away. So yeah, that's a good idea, because that will communicate, that will perpetuate his memory. And there is a saying, for example, in Africa, and that's an important thing that is mentioned here, that people survive so long as their memory survives, right? So if you are able to perpetuate his memory, it's in a way pushing what he stood for and so on, right? So I think that's a very great initiative, very good.